So I'm a sociologist. My main area of interest is social problems, and in particular, the way that social problems become increasingly therapeutized or psychologized, and sort of set up as problems of subjectivity, as problems of the subject, things that are ultimately down to human behavior, human weakness, something wrong at the level of the human being. And I think there's a kind of hegemonic there's a hegemonic outlook that stems from the psi disciplines that's very powerful in society and particularly powerful in American society, and that has permeated leftist movements, I think, for the worse. Because you don't need a theory of subjectivity or psychology to understand why things go wrong within capitalism. That's really the domain of our modern kind of bourgeois economics that uses human failures and frailties to understand why things go wrong in the economy. And this becomes a sort of insidious justification for the creeping control of behavior. But we don't need that as Marxists, right? I don't need a theory of human greed or human stupidity or human frailty. I can take the same subject that bourgeois economists did classical economists did, and Marx did this, took the same subject, took the same starting point, and you will still come to the same problems. And people misunderstand me. They think that I'm saying, oh, human beings are perfectly rational. I'm saying even if human beings are perfectly rational, we would still have the same problems within capitalism. Some people might make mistakes, but when you have behaviors coalescing around trends, hundreds of thousands, millions of people doing something, tells you that there's a logic, there's some kind of push there. And our job is to figure out what that is. So that's a massive part of my research, my ongoing work is pointing out the ways in which this hegemonic kind of understanding of social problems permeates so much of our everyday life, of the way that we understand why things go wrong. And I think a lot of people on the left don't recognize it as such because it's great. One of the biggest advances in recent years in terms of capitalist ideology is in framing the utter fleecing of the working class in kindly, caring terms, in psychologized terms, even in quasi-leftist terms. And I actually don't think this is anything new. Marx wrote in the Grundrisse about the romantic viewpoint, and he says that capitalism has never moved beyond the romantic viewpoint, and it will accompany it as legitimate antithesis up to capitalism's bitter end. So this sort of like romantic anti-capitalism, this um, antithesis or this critique of capitalism on the basis of like, feeling a desire for a lost past, a fullness, an imagined fullness that existed in the past. This notion that things are just going too fast for humanity to deal with, this kind of thing. So it's framed in that this kind of sustaining ideology of capitalism is framed in a very leftish kind of way, in a very therapeutic way, as being on behalf of victims. And I think a lot of people on the left get fooled by that. And that's a lot of what I try to do is point out that no, look, this is just capitalism in decline being sold to you as socialism or being sold to you as like a leftist progressive thing. To give you an example of that, my first book in 2015 was about this idea of happiness as a political project that became powerful in the UK and well, all around the world really. Started out in the US and sort of diffused from there. But this idea that like, oh, money doesn't make you happy, and people are like, oh yeah, that's like a leftist thing, isn't it? Well, I don't know about you, but I don't usually go out on strike begging my employer to give me less money for my own well-being. No. So at first glance, it seems kind of leftish. There's more to it than that. Like if you read my book, I go into it in terms of like this turning away from economic growth. And I found that to be very interesting. Why would these sort of well-to-do academics, these policymakers, conservative policymakers, be telling us that economic growth doesn't matter? That's a bit weird. And the way that I explained it is that capitalism has both a productive side and a destructive side. It must grow, but it also can't grow. And this is sort of asking us to acquiesce to its destructive side, to its stagnate, to its inbuilt kind of stagnation. This is something that Marx talks about, even in just the Communist Manifesto, that capitalism outlives its historical justification when it stops being a productive system. It's no longer able to, it's not an absolute system for the production of wealth, but at a certain point comes into conflict with the continuation of wealth. So this is very basic kind of stuff that if you kind of go to Marx, you can see, but it gets sold to us as very leftist, right? And then leftists are like, oh yeah, we don't want economic growth. You see, and because it sounds, it sounds like something we should get on board with. So that's kind of what I do. And I try to go into things that are sold to us as quite progressive and point out the way that it hides within it a destruction of subjectivity, the very thing that we need to understand the world, to take hold of the world, to control the world, and thus the future, and sells us stagnation and even our own loss of freedoms and so on as a kind of freedom, or at least a kind of psychological freedom, a freedom from within. And then my YouTube channel for years, I just posted TV clips and stuff like that on there. I never, people asked me back in like 2016, as I'm sure a lot of people went through this, like, oh, you should do a podcast. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't have the time. There's no chance. And then eventually, of course, after the wave went, I was like, all right, I'll do a podcast. So that's what I've been doing. And I've been having conversations about particular things that I've been trying to think through. So I will talk to people so I've been trying to think through really nailing down libertarian communism. So that's my next podcast that's coming out with Reed Kane. But of course, I wanted to talk about libertarian communism. We just like went all over the place, talked about the dialectic and stuff like that. So I just my philosophy is I'm interested in something and I want to hear different viewpoints and kind of make up my mind. And, the famous phrase, a mark of a great mind is being able to entertain a thought without accepting it. And I always just assume that other people are able to do that. So I don't, first of all, I feel bad inviting someone onto my channel and then being like, rah, coming at them really rudely. So even if I'm like not 100% convinced, I might like kind of prod and ask questions to hear more about it. And then I'll really think and make up my mind in the editing process. And maybe I'll insert little readings and that kind of thing that kind of present a contrasting viewpoint without being rude. So I don't
My
like the
God.
idea of like inviting someone and tear them apart. No, I just want to hear people out and I want the audience to make up their mind and I want to have polite conversations because the last thing I want to is to like I'll talk to right wingers, talk to left wingers, talk to whatever, I don't care. I don't want to be that caricature of the blue-haired leftist that's like frothing at the mouth. Like, I just want to hear people out. And oftentimes you find that people don't live up to the caricatures that people make of them. And there are things that people say that who come from a completely different viewpoint that are correct. And it's interesting that you come to the same conclusions from completely different areas and then take them in completely different directions after that. And that should make you think, and I definitely think that any kind of politics or Marxist politics shouldn't be moralistic, shouldn't create friend-enemy distinctions. We should be focused on systems and processes. So I'm not interested in sort of making enemies and pointing out who personifying some enemy we should all direct our hate at. Anyway, so that's me and what I do. It's a very long lecture I just gave.
No.